Hello, everybody. How are you all doing today? It is another episode of Chicken Boxx. Hi, Dr. Draper.
Hey there, Misha. Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And welcome to the Chicken Boxx. As you can see, our co host Kevin Peck is not with us on today. And so show him some love in the chat. Let him know that you miss him already, even though we're just a couple of seconds in. But hey, I'm Francis Tony Draper, CEO and publisher of the Afro. And we always talk about the fact that this is an intergenerational, multi-generational live show. And so we are live. It's not pre-recorded. And so we just say that up front. That's our disclaimer. But I am representing the millennial, and I say millennial boomers. I'm a boomer, but I love a lot about the millennials and especially the tech. And
Yes.
Misha?
Yes. No, I love that you are a millennial boomer. That is one of my favorite things, other than that you're a great boss and leader and woman of God, is your wonderful embrace of uh, I won't even say only millennials. You even embrace the Gen Zers, Dr. Draper. You love all that you can learn from every generation, and so that's what we do here on the Chicken Boxx, of course, as well. And so, as a boomer millennial, I can't do just the initials like Dr. Draper because they mean something else in our culture. But it I consider myself a boomer millennial because I appreciate so much that the boomer generation has taught us. And this conversation in particular, I think last week I was able to learn and grow and expand my position because it was intergenerational. So drop your generation in the comment section, and I'm ready for part two because I think I'll learn a lot again.
Absolutely. So, in case you're just joining us for the first time, um, and you've never heard of the Chicken Boxx, yes, with two X's, this is a place where we say, "Don't be a chicken, get on the box." Now, you can't get on the box the same way you do in Clubhouse or on the new Twitter platform, but you can get in the chat box right here on Facebook Live. And so, we'd love to hear from you. Tell us what generation you're representing. Weigh in, and we will be sure to give you a shout out. I'm going to give a shout out to our producer, Dana, on today. So thank you, Dana, for being with us. And she'll make sure your comments get posted so that we can see them. And so we're here to dispel myths and stereotypes around the Black community. So grab your favorite beverage, your lunch, your dinner, or whatever, and don't be a chicken and get on the box. So we know the different topics, Misha. You already hinted at this week's topic because our listeners last week said, "Hey, do a part two." We know different topics hit different people depending on their age in a different way, and so our guests today are probably representing different view. Not probably. We're talking about one subject, but nobody is monolithic on the subject, and so we are going to hear what they have to say. I am excited, and so last week, Misha, we had a conversation with oh yeah, Dr. Cherie Butts, right? And she was a cellular or is a cellular immunologist with Biogen, and you guys heard the conversation. She is trying to get more of us involved, more of us, those of us who have more melanin in our skin, get us more involved in clinical trials. And it was fascinating as we talked about, what it meant to be a participant in a clinical trial. That's right, Craig Talley. Four wings, fries, salt, pepper, ketchup, half and half. That's what a chicken box is if you are from Baltimore. That's what we call a chicken box. Greasy, yes, but it's good. And Dr. Singsarin Lord, we welcome you as a proud Generation Xer. We'll let Kevin know when he comes back that the Gen Xers were in the house. And so we're going to unpack a little bit more around this issue of clinical trials and the participation of African Americans. why it's so important. We want you to weigh in. How do you really feel about that? And so, Misha, without further ado, come on, let's bring our guest on. Would you do this?
Yes.
Okay.
Our guests are amazing. They are also continuing in this really important conversation of African Americans in the space of clinical trials. First of all, I should start by saying February happens to be retinitis pigmentosa month. And that's at least what sort of got at least one of our guests, I should say, if not both, into this journey of research and Black people in medical research. And so, as we acknowledge retinitis pigmentosa, we also want our guests to break down the importance of Black people in research in clinical trials. And so, these are entrepreneurs and medical professionals, sort of all wrapped in one. Welcome to the show, CEO and founder of Indigene US AI and Indigene US Health Group, Yusuf Enriquez, and CSO and Indigene's co-founder, Dr. Bradford Wilson. Welcome to the show. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Pleasure. Pleasure for having us.
So we're glad to we're so glad to have you, and we know a little bit about you. But for our audience today, um, come on and tell us about you. And don't leave. See, I can look at what I've seen of your bio, and we tend to leave things out. But tell us who you are, and tell us how you got interested in this subject matter. So either one of you wants to go first.
Yeah,
Tell us a
sure.
little bit about who you
Yeah,
are and what you do.
yeah, no problem. Yusuf Enriquez, founder and CEO of Indigenous AI and Indigenous Health. Little backstory. Born and raised in Kingston, Jamaica. Always had a strong love for science. Grew up with one TV channel watching Dr. Doogie Howser as a young kid. So it was always curious mind around the healthcare space. And so it was only natural that when I came to the States for high school, came here in the early 90s for high school in Miami, Florida, I got really engaged with, summer science, Saturday science. Still was good at a very athletic three-letter sport, but still always had a love for the periodic table. Always was curious of how things worked in the body. Anatomy and physiology were kind of my favorite subjects. So always been embedded to and love the science and healthcare space. And so I had the opportunity to join the military straight out of high school and joined as a medic. So I started my career at 17 years old. Now 25 years in healthcare. Where I started off as a combat medic for the United States Army. And then my career kind of progressed to working for the government, the FDA, the VA, then doing clinical research on PTSD. So my first entrance into the genomic clinical trial space was, of course, at the FDA, where I regulated companies like Biogen, Johnson and Johnson. So I had big responsibilities there to make sure that they were making drugs and devices properly for the public. And so that career then led me into being more hands-on with the DoD started to look for biomarkers for PTSD because we were suffering 21 suicides a day in our veteran community. So that was my first large program that I ran, about $25 million, overseeing biomarker research within in Mount Sinai, NYU, and Columbia Psychiatry Department, and the 9 VAs in New York and New Jersey. That then led, to identifying genes that had strong predisposition to PTSD, anxiety, depression, bipolar. And Dr. Bradford Wilson was one of the first guy, being a Howard alum, that I called. A part of a founding team of 5 African American males. We went out to Silicon Valley and built a blood test for PTSD.
Wow.
So Indigenous is our second company together, Dr. Wilson and I. So I called him up when we started getting the pandemic and we started to see the high death of minorities in the COVID pandemic, which, as you understand now, a lot of those were, comorbid conditions, underlying health disparities that were leading to the high debt rate in our community. And so I had to respond to the call again. MIT asked me to do a Hacking Racism in Healthcare. And so Indigenous started last 2020. In the middle of COVID, we started looking at creating a global initiative because I already knew the drug trials are 95% European white males. So I'll pause there. I'll let Brad introduce
Well, wait a
himself.
minute, before you go any further, now my millennial friend said that told me we should tell me that if you hear something like that, you're supposed to, you're supposed to give them some snaps, right? And I'm gonna and I'm gonna ask you too, either one of you, because I just left speaking to a group of middle schoolers, and somebody said they wanted to go in the science field, but they didn't really do well in science. But we hear terms. Come on, break it down for us. Tell us what biomarkers are, and tell us what comorbidities are, so we make sure everybody's on the same page. Either one of you can answer that, and then Dr. Wilson want to weigh in and hear your background as well. Wow, what a background we just heard.
Yeah, well, Brad's the scientist, so anything biomarker related, I'm gonna let him explain.
Okay, okay. Well, that's a good segue. I like the way you did that.
Right.
All right, come on, Dr. Wilson, tell us about
Sure.
yourself. Let us know about biomarkers and other things. The comorbidity, because we hear comorbidities all the time, and a lot of times people understand what they mean, but I don't know that everybody does. So that would be helpful.
Sure. Absolutely. Happy to, more than happy to. So when we talk about biomarkers, we're usually referring to some type of measurable level of it's either something in your blood or some type of measurable clinically that you can measure clinically that's associated with a given disease or condition, and that is usually used to kind of definitively diagnose a condition, right? So that's what we talk about when we talk about biomarkers. And then when we talk about comorbidities, we talk about clinical issues or diseases or conditions. Then we have things that are normally and frequently and commonly associated with them, and that are closely related. So, for example, if you talk about hypertension, one thing that's a comorbidity of hypertension is kidney disease and kidney failure, because of the relationship between high blood pressure and the function of the kidney, and what happens as a result of chronic high blood pressure over a long period of time. So those are kind of two, general kind of quick and dirty definitions of those two things, and it does segue well into to my background. Originally from born in Brooklyn, raised in Queens, New York, National Merit Scholar, and selected one institution to attend for undergrad, and that was Howard University, because I had ambitions on becoming a medical doctor from a very young age, and pursued academic path that was in line with that, actually. And so then eventually got introduced to genetics by one of our great Howard professors named Dr. Norma Williams, and she intrigued my initial interest in genetics, and then which I eventually went on to pursue and earn a doctoral degree, PhD at Howard in. And then as a result of that, shortly after that, I actually was introduced to, Yusuf, and we then, went out to California, as he mentioned, with the former company, and it's where I was in the lab and built that assay that looked at those genetic predisposition for those mental health disorders that he mentioned. And then actually did some more work with another company that was a part of the cohort of the program that we were in the area of women's health and reproductive health. And then met some more Howard alum in that area, and working in some women's health areas in terms of PCOS, and also some other HBCU sisters from other HBCUs, fellow HBCUs at Morgan State, working in endometriosis space, and then also another fantastic sister down working in the uterine fibroid space. So I had the opportunity to work with those wonderful folks there with the other company that I work with. And then Yusuf gave me a call about Indigenous. And of course, having worked with them and knowing, he had talked about what the ultimate goals were, later on down the line. And so it was the go time. So he gave me the call and I said, he said, I'm with you. And then here we are about what, 16 months later.
Wow. Wow. Now look, these brothers are bad, y'all. There's some these brothers have it together and they've got some information that we all need. And so just a shout out to both of you who didn't just go to school and hang on the yard. I mean, they came on up out of there and they are doing phenomenal things. And so thank you for sharing. I know y'all didn't share it all. I've seen your background. You all have a whole lot of other things we're gonna pull out of you because you all are really pioneers in the field for the things that you're looking at. PTSD, well, I mean, women's health issues. I mean, comorbidities. You all have a whole menu of things that you're looking at. And so this is a chicken box, and we get on the box. And so Misha, you on the box right now for about 30 seconds. Come on, let's respond to what we just heard.
Oh my goodness, so much. First of all, I need to get on the box and just applaud these black men, as you said, who are bosses, who are i- taking their work seriously and have taken their work seriously since they were young people. I mean, again, I just don't think we celebrate those stories very often, and particularly black men who we hear all the time about not filling our college campuses and not being medical professionals, et cetera. And so I just want to uplift that. And then, this whole world is a little bit like me watching a movie in Mandarin with no subtitles. I have to admit, I'm not fluent in it by any means. However, it is really great to sort of hear your passion and work in doing it. So I'm on the box just to understand, more importantly, why myself as a Black person should uh, be clear as to why Black people need to be informed about these issues, but also why they need to participate in clinical trials. Know that research and medical research can be important. All right, I'm off the box.
So that's a great segue. So last week we talked about clinical trials with Dr. Butts, as we've already said, and we talked. Some of our listeners, viewers, brought up things like the Tuskegee experiment and Henrietta Lacks and some of the things that we've heard about why we do not, or some of us do not, participate in clinical trials. I talked about my time on an institution review board where so many clinical trials did not include us, but then the results were there to as if we were included. And so I want each of you to talk to us a little bit about clinical trials and your take on clinical trials and why we should be a part of those.
Yeah, I'll go first, and then Brad chime in. So yeah, as I mentioned in my background, I used to work for the FDA, right? So I was one of the individual regulators that was left in charge to make sure that medical device and pharmaceutical companies followed, all of the necessary protocols and regulations. So I started seeing the trend of submissions coming in for approval with just really limited amount of minorities, women of all ethnic background, and then minorities were just not in these trials. When I was looking and reviewing these what they call 510Ks and pre-market approval submissions, which is part of what you do with the clinical trial, which is the baseline of conducting the study and then providing that data to the FDA. And so, yeah, I've known that this has been a big problem a long time, because again, how could you use just, one, ethnic group to then, determine a medication that is then going to be administered to multiple groups of ethnic background without any strong evidence to support that it works. I think science has kind of evolved, and that's why we're talking about now genetics and next gen sequencing. But this has been a problem that has been over the last 40, 50 years, where traditionally 90 to 95% of all trials have been European white males. So you can see how skewed that data could be of not having representation of women and minorities in it. And so that's why you end up with lack of efficacy in certain drugs. I always used to remember my grandma before she passed away, they would switch her medication and she would start saying there's something not right, right? There's something not right. And as I started to learn in the FDA, as I started to work, she had a point, because this was somebody that had been on a certain medication for a certain period of time, and then it gets changed, and then she's having some, adverse effect to it. So yeah, so that's been the problem. That's what the indigenous is trying to solve, increasing more diverse population to be, and then drive policy to kind of mandate. Right now, the FDA doesn't require you to have a certain percentage of that clinical trial that's allocated to minority. They recommend, but what we hope to do at Indigenous is to show the efficacy of these drugs. If we're able to increase at least 25%,
Mhm.
participants should be of women and minority descent, the minimum. You got to start somewhere, and we'll definitely see the impact of how those clinical trials then get used to get approved drugs. So clinical trials, on the importance of it, we're being left behind on that. And so, there's multiple aspects of that, right? I want to make sure that we do understand in our community why there's hesitancy. We didn't just get up one day and it's propaganda or it's gossip. So there, like you just mentioned, Henrietta Lacks, Tuskegee, those were real examples of us being, exploited and taken advantage of. And so, that's always first and foremost in our minds. But we have to kind of change the narrative, because for the first time in my lifetime, melanated people are going to drive the future of precision medicine. That's why it's so important. We already have data set of multiple and millions of European white males in the trials. We need more diversity as far as women and other ethnic groups to participate, because that's going to be the way that precision medicine, which is what they're calling it, is really being administered from a personalized level. So again, if we're not being included, then we can't have personalized treatment, and then we'll be left out on this new movement and advancement in technology and medicine. We're going to be left out if we don't get involved. And Indigenous has come up with ways that we have now realized that we have the science, the knowledge, skills, and background for us to do those research as well. So not only trusting our most valuable asset to others, we have the individuals in the community where we could, the scientists like you see here, the experienced folks in our network that look like us can actually do these community-based studies.
Wow. Whew, that was a lot, right? But thank you for that. And Dr. Wilson, you want to weigh in on clinical trials, and then I'm curious about the name Indigenous too. As you tell us a little bit about the background of that.
Sure. Absolutely. So, if there's one thing that the pandemic has done, is kind of like introduce the world to the science, right? The science of genetics and genomics. Because now, for example, folks are talking about mRNA vaccines, right? In terms of one of the ones that are available. So in terms of what has happened as a result of the pandemic, is the world has kind of gotten this crash course on genetics in some kind of, in a kind of general way. And when we talk about genetics, and we talk about genetic diversity among human beings, we look to Africa, because Africa is the birthplace of what we call modern human beings, Homo sapiens sapiens, right? And as a result, populations of African descent and across the African diaspora are the most genetically diverse. So what does this mean when it comes to clinical trials, right? So when it comes to clinical trials, if if these genetically diverse populations aren't represented in these trials, then there is going to be information missed regarding how a given drug or device um, works in different populations, if there are different, as Yusuf mentioned, adverse reactions or responses to those drugs or devices in other populations, that you would not capture information that you would not collect or that you would not generate if if these populations are not participating. And and as Yusuf mentioned, we're quite aware of you know historical events like what we call the Tuskegee study, but that was actually a National Public Health Service study, right? And we are
Mhm.
aware of Henrietta Lacks as a black woman is the mother of all humanity, and another black woman is probably responsible for most of the health and public health and advances that we all benefit from, right? In addition to that, so we're well aware of that. So that's why we have come with this solution in terms of it being us that's doing the research, and
Yep, that's
us that are going to our community and saying, hey, we need to do this, and this is why, and this is why it's important. And and to you know they say actions speak louder than words. So we're focused on the things that are impacting our community. So if you can't get involved with that, then I mean, this is the approach we're taking. We're starting with us. We are the priority. We're taking the initiative, and we're doing things in a way that where participation is beneficial on lots of different levels. And I'll pause there because it's a lot to our ambitions are you know are are
are
are
large
big
like they should be. Right.
are big, but
Yep.
the problems are big, right?
Right.
So we need big solutions for big problems.
Well, yes, and not only are we the priority, we are now Black and brown people are the majority. We're moving towards a majority in the world as well. So so that is really thank you for sharing that. That's really really important work. But you mentioned the clinical trials for the vaccine. All right, we know there's a lot of vaccine hesitancy. How well represented were we in those trials?
Well,
Ah,
Yusuf talked to that.
yeah. So I think to piggyback on Dr. Wilson, I think you asked about the name Indigenous. Came up with it in the middle of the night. Though I wanted to focus on that gene in the middle.
That's the best
And
time, middle of
again,
the night.
so yeah, it's spelled a little different. So we've tried to be as catchy, but also wanted to leave a mark on making sure that we're highlighting the us at the end. So indigenous kind of really represent what we were trying to do, which is like Dr. Wilson said, we're using the novel technology of understanding our genome and our genetic makeup that is now important for us to look at the future of medicine. So that's where the name was a little bit crafted with some ingenuity there to kind of get the catchiness to it. And so a lot of the things that we're trying to do is to really try to focus on our community, because we do understand that there's a lack of trust, right? That the trust is not there for these large institutions that are trying to carry on these large audacious goal of getting more people involved. But I think it's again, with the past, the history, we really need to kind of focus on, from a community level, having conversations like these where we're having individuals from our community starting to share the word around the health literacy. So To Misha's point, we're not expecting our communities to know all of these fancy words and terms. And so, it's clinicians and scientists like Dr. Wilson and other doctors as well that needs to kind of communicate this. It's just passing like we pass everything else down, like your grandma's cooking, right? We pass down the recipe. We now have to kind of take that approach in order for us to kind of move into the direction where we're passing the information down from a trusted source, right? You don't question grandma's biscuit, right? The formula for the biscuit, whatever grandma gives you as the formula, that's what you've kind of learned as the next generation. We need to start explaining, because I think we're at a critical moment right now with our community where what we're talking about now will benefit your future grandkids and great grandkids. And so it's an effort from all of us, yeah, all of us in our community to kind of come together, whether it's communicators to help scientists like myself and Dr. Wilson, boil down the information to make it a little bit more palatable and understand it at the level that we needed to, as you mentioned, with the Gen Zers, the millennials. So we now have all of those responsibility to make sure we're crafting message that could speak to each of those generations.
And Yusuf, I know that you sort of have a personal connection to this work as well. I've gotten to know a bit of your journey, and I know you have two Gen Z twin daughters who this kind of work will affect in the future as well. Can you tell us, if you don't mind, a little bit about your personal connection to this work?
Yeah, so personal connection to this was twofold. In 2012, my kid's aftercare provider took his life, Marine, to suicide. So that's what drove me to look at the biomarkers and looking at how we could reduce suicide. 2 years later, through a routine ophthalmology appointment with my daughters, we were able to, the doctor informed us that they may have retinitis pigmentosa. And so I didn't want to believe the diagnosis. Luckily, I had good government jobs, so I had good, health insurance. So we were able to see the specialist at the New York Eye and Ear, and then the John Hopkins Wilmer Eye Institute. So I went and got out two confirmations. And so it was confirmed that my twin girls had retinitis pigmentosa. Both are identical twins, so they both shared the eye disorder. Incurable. So you can imagine, as a father, his oldest, daughters at the time were, faced with something. So I lived with that for about a year before even telling them. But they had the signs and symptoms. They couldn't see in the dark, which are some of the first signs of the disease, the disorder. And so their peripheral vision was the next to go. So currently, right now, it's like looking through a binoculars. If you've ever looked through a binoculars, that's the range and field of view that my daughters have right now, which is about 60%. So being able to identify it earlier, we were able to do some of the, alternative treatment and remedies to help slow it down. But as they become older, statistically, if progressed by 40, they'll be completely blind based on diagnosis. But the devil is a lie. So I believe in faith. And the first thing, when I told my daughter, the youngest of the two by 2 minutes, to ask me if I was going to fix it. And so since 2014, I've been on this mission to use, my knowledge and the academic background that I have to look at novel ways on how to look at these rare disease and health disparity areas that affect Black and Brown community. The other reason why this was important as far as clinical trial, as you could imagine, we couldn't find any trials that had representation. And some of the so-called current treatment at the time would have jeopardized their reproductive organs. So as a father, wanted the aspiration of making sure that if God allowed to have grandkids. And so, we have sought other alternative by, again, my background and talking to experts in the field of, the right, foods to eat, the right type of, treatments, turmeric and all the other stuff that helps with vision and retina health. And so we've been able to kind of slow the progress down a little bit. That they're now 21 years old, and they still live quite a productive life. They graduated high school, because you can imagine as twins that could have been a turn in their mental health status, just knowing that they had an incurable eye disorder. So we've been able to manage, family support, and my experience and background, help with making sure that they had the right diet to make sure that the eye condition hasn't aggressively progressed to where they would have to start considering, walking with aid and also learning braille.
Wow. Thank you for sharing. You told that's a lot. And I want to piggyback on something that you said, and then I'll do a little commercial, and then Misha, we want to hear what's on the digital streets. Dr. Wilson, we're going to come back to you. But you said yourself about passing things down like a recipe. So here's my commercial. The Afro's doing a recipe book. Okay.
Okay.
And we want people's recipes. And so we're gonna put up on the screen, and we want to launch it in advance, I think, of our 130th birthday, which is in August. We're about 90 recipes short. We wanted to have like 150 recipes. We have 60. And so nothing like passing down grandma's recipe for real. And if it's just a pinch of this and a pinch of that, we'll take that and put that in the recipe. So that's my recipe plug for today.
Didn't even know that. So glad I could contribute.
Thank you. Yeah, you prompted a call for recipes. Apple used to have a cooking school,
Right. Oh, wow.
and so the cooking school went on for years where people competed for new appliances based on their recipes. So we're going to put some of those recipes in the book too, from 50, 60, 70 years ago,
Wow.
as well. So thank you for that. And thank you for that. That was key information. You gave so much key information about diet, about, looking into things and finding out the best combination of treatments. And so, Dr. Wilson, hold on, because we're coming right to you. Misha, what are the digital streets saying about uh, clinical trials and all that we've heard?
Yes, the digital streets have been busy talking about clinical trials for Yusuf and Dr. Wilson. We call the digital streets those folks talking about all that all that is anything, right? Normally in journalism, we do man on the street. We talk to the people out there. We can't do that now with the
Yeah.
pandemic. So we go to the digital streets and see what people are talking about. And as always, I must emphasize to those watching, as well as to these amazing medical professionals and entrepreneurs on the call, these are not at all views or direct opinions of the Afro American newspapers, even if we agree or disagree with any of them. And these are solely views and opinions and quotes from the digital streets. So, that said, some of these, if you guys tuned in last week, you may have heard some of these are brand new. But since we have new professionals, I wanted to get their take on the old and new digital street gossip. So, in response to an Abbott News tweet, someone wrote, "Voluntary clinical trials have a diversity problem. I don't think you want to make clinical trials forced onto Black people to meet a quota. Google Tuskegee syphilis study." Someone wrote, "Someone wanted a panelist on a Brookings Institute. Oh, sorry, this is the explanation. Someone wanted a panelist on a Brookings Institute panel on policy issues important to Black Americans to answer this question. So I'm posing this question to you all. Can any of these esteemed panelists speak to the importance of diversifying clinical trials and repairing the harms of the medical industrial complex on Black people?" That's the question. So keep that with you as I continue along the list. Should Black people participate in clinical trials for breast cancer? Again, this is a question I found on Twitter. If there were more Black people holding these clinical trials, I think the participation would be higher amongst us. And the person put us in capital letters. Last week, we found that the American Cancer Society wrote, according to Cancer Facts and Figures for Black people, systemic racism continues to drive cancer disparities. And they suggest bridging the gap by increasing diversity in clinical trials as the first suggestion, then reducing bias and educating providers, and finally, providing financial incentives for the provision of high quality care. Dr. Jennifer Manley wrote, we don't know whether the drug is effective or safe in Black people because so few were included in the trials. This reveals the role that structural racism plays in defining the who, what, and where of ADRD research. But it's not just about, oh my goodness, Dr. Butts told us, aducanumab, I hope I'm saying it right, not unique to the trials. And I'll end with this quote from Jamel Hill, who said, this is why these comparisons to the Tuskegee experiment are so wrong. A Black woman invented the vaccine. Black doctors were on the advisory panel to improve emergency authorization for the vaccine. And Black people were part of clinical trials. All right. Dr. Wilson, you can also tell me if I butchered that neurological medicine again this week. But those are a lot of stereotypes. Some of them I think you all have sort of emphasized in this conversation, while other people seem a little leery. So I'd love to hear your point of view of what the digital streets have to say about Black people involved in clinical trials.
I'll start and say that there were a lot of things points that I think are quite valid, as you mentioned, some of which that we've spoken to regarding the lack of trust in our community, and this is why we are. But then there are others that are kind of in the line what we are thinking as well, in terms of if we as Black scientists and clinicians take the initiative to do the research and engage our communities, then we will be more likely to have for them. It'll be more likely that they participate. And when these research studies and clinical trials are being conducted for conditions and diseases that impact our community, particularly disproportionately, then that will also encourage and motivate folks in our communities to come and participate. And then with regards to the importance, that message was right there in the comments as well. If we're not represented, we will not understand if something works for us or if there are adverse effects of a given thing in our populations. So those are two major reasons for us to participate, right? And then you can layer on the information that I was talking about in terms of our genetics on that as well, in terms of that being right in line with that. So then, there's this information, but then there are, we have, when we talk about vaccine hesitancy, specifically, right? That's an interesting topic, right? Because you have people who, are in, you have a range of views from a range of people. Some people who actually work in the health industry and as clinicians, who aren't necessarily, who don't necessarily agree in terms of getting quote unquote vaccinated, and then you have folks on the other side who say it's for the best. So it's a wide ranging of opinions, and it's a conversation that I think that needs to be had, and the reason that it's impacting everybody, because it's because it's the issues of the mandates, right? And I think that's the biggest thing. And so when you try to say someone has to do something, like one of the comments mentioned, forcing, trying to force African Americans to participate. And I don't think that we're not in favor of that, of trying to force, but we are in favor of setting a standard for diversity that is in place for these drug manufacturers, and then let individuals who are interested in participating, let them participate. But so it's an interesting conversation. You can talk about the science of vaccines, you can talk about the science of immunology. There's a lot of things you could talk about in the conversation. You could talk about the risks. You could talk about in terms of the risks of getting COVID versus the risks of getting vaccinated. So it's a interesting conversation, and one that's been an ongoing one, right? And ultimately, I think, and another conversation that's been around it is about whether or not it should be an individual's choice to get vaccinated or not. And I think that's one of the main central issues that's kind of been the focus of a lot of folks across the spectrum, in the last few weeks, but from the beginning when the whole topics of mandate started to come out.
Wow, thank you. Go ahead, Yusef. You want to?
Yeah, I think again, for what we're trying to do here, all of those with the digital streets comments were starting to resonate with me, and how we summed it up. And I think Dr. Wilson said it best. These are some of the things that we're aware, and we've done our research, and we know. We did a hackathon last year with MIT where we had over 1,000 people. We made it HBCU centric. We had probably the most diverse hackathon in the healthcare space that we led with. So Indigenous was really formed on solid data around my public knowledge of how these drug trials are done at the agency. What I could say, again, being that I'm on both sides of the fence of being African American male, but also a scientist that's looking to solve some of these issues, is that we need to have an controlled ecosystem and environment for us. That's what Indigenous really is formed around. We know we have the scientific expertise. Like Jamil Hill said, we had a Black woman for the first time being highlighted as taking the vaccine. As when President Obama got elected, you saw that influence, right? You saw the movement to people to be more engaged, more involved, wanted to know who this young lady, Dr. Corbett, was. Those are kind of the things we're talking about as far as bridging that gap and help building the trust within our community. But that's only one person, right? We need to see more of that. And I think, when we did the hackathon, trust was the number one issue. You're not going to be able to build that by using, the NIH and the federal government to do that. But we also need, like you mentioned in the digital street, we need the funding. Too many times you see funding going to PWIs, we call them, non-HBCU institutions that then recruit from HBCU institutions to fulfill these gaps. Well, that's what the Indigenous is trying to do, is we're trying to force, these, NIH government programs, that we have the capability. We have bright scientists like Dr. Corbett, Dr. Wilson in our community where we could do our own community research. That then makes us in control of the IP, the data, and then we're able to drive what we believe are the things that are affecting our community around the health disparities, because there should be no reason why supplements, vitamin supplements get more funding than diabetes, right? Who does that affect mostly?
Yeah.
Hypertension. We know it's no secret what the disease areas that are affected, but if you go and look it up, they're not as funded as other areas. And so those are the things that we need support from the community to get engaged in this ecosystem we're creating, because we have strength in numbers. It's always been the case, right? You watch, the last Dr. Martin Luther King birthday just passed. What did he have down at the White House? Numbers. What did he have marching in Selma? Numbers. Because that's the only way we're going to get people to pay attention, the pharmaceutical companies, the regulators, the policymakers, and the funders, is that we have to have the numbers. And I think this is a pivotal time where we have bright scientists, doctors, that are out there that we need to bring together in this ecosystem, because we can now do it ourselves. That's not a story that they could say that we don't have the intellectual capability to do clinical trials. That's now a lie.
Absolutely. It always has been a lie. You were on the box, and we're almost out of time. And so we're talking about trusted sources. And so what happens so often, I'm on the box, we get 30 seconds on the box, and then we'll do another quick 30-second round for everybody, and then we'll be done for the day. But I'm on the box. We talk about trusted sources. And so when we look at the medical field overall and the paucity of medical professionals in some of the disciplines, the docs aren't referring people to clinical trials, right? And so I'm glad we're having this conversation, because you talk about trusted sources, the Black press, the Black church, and when clinical trials are advertised, and they are, of some people that don't look like us don't know that you should be advertising them through your Black newspaper, wherever that's located in your market. Okay, I see someone has a study going on now that's up on the screen. So we're glad to advertise that. And there are places that you can go. I guess it's the FDA website. There are websites you can go to if you're interested in clinical trials, but the proactivity is not there to recruit us. And then people say they can't find us. And so kudos to both of you, because if I understand your business model, you're going to make sure that people know about clinical trials, can effortlessly enroll in clinical trials, and I'm sure you'll be blowing up some doctors' phones and websites and all that, to say to them, hey doc, if you're gonna be the PI on this, the principal investigator on this trial, we're gonna hold you accountable for the recruitment part. So I am off of the box. And so let me, Misha, I'm gonna give you the last word today, but I want to ask our guests, Dr. Wilson, anything else you want to add? This has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you both. So you're on the box for your 30 seconds.
Sure, thank you. Absolutely. We understand that, and we at Indigenous understand that this is going to take an effort. It's going to take a village, and we need to. It's going to, we're approaching this and attacking it in kind of three phases. On the front end, looking at education, advocacy, awareness in terms of health literacy, and then secondly, we're looking at research participation conducted by researchers that look like the community that they want to engage in the research with, on health issues and conditions and diseases that impact that community, right? Black folks are just not going to want to just enroll in a clinical trial just because it's a clinical trial. It needs to be something that they want to have potential benefit from, or they could potentially benefit someone in their family that's infected by it. And then lastly, in terms of the benefit to the community, our model incorporates a way in that there are also some revenue generation opportunities involved in addition. So we're looking at it in terms of, and then that last phase being on the treatment end, in terms of connecting our populations with clinicians that look like them, again, because we understand that there are some disparities that disappear when the clinician looks like the patient. So we're kind of attacking in this in three phases, and I may have gone over my 30 seconds. Apologies.
No worries, it's fine. I think Dr. Draper might be frozen, so I'm gonna let the box continue to keep going on. And Yusuf, tell us some of your last thoughts. I should say we could have this conversation forever, and so we probably need a part three, and I'm hoping you all can come back at some
Oh,
point.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, again, I think, what we want to do is just let the folks know that we've thought this through and through. We've set up an ecosystem. So, this is not just a one off, as Dr. Wilson mentioned. We've set up biosforall.com, which is our engagement platform. It's our Genius app that's launching on February 23rd, both iOS and Android. So we're creating that storefront to work with and engage communities that are faced with some of these rare diseases, like the ones that my daughters have, cancer, whatever it may be. We need to create that community that creates that bond and that trust within this community. And then we need to conduct our own community-based research by, like what was mentioned, getting community faith-based, our clinicians, our physician that look like us to join the app as well, because as we start to find out what these different disease areas or focus is, we'll like to provide the community of individuals going through those disease conditions with the right expertise. And we believe that way we'll be able to build trust within our community to then get to the later stage of actually starting, making policies and then getting individuals to consent to providing their blood samples for research and participation in the research. But we have to be the ones that's in charge of it. I do 100% believe that the involvement of Dr. Corbett led to more individual being more aware, as Dr. Wilson said, of clinical trials and what research was being done. And I think we could replicate that within our community by building these trusts and carrying out these initiatives, because we now have the intellectual capability and the people that we know that could drive these initiatives. So thank you all for having us.
Thank you. I cannot emphasize enough how much this conversation has been informative and engaging and helping, I think, everybody tuning in, and I know myself as a layman, further understand why we have to continue having these conversations and how it affects us all so incredibly deeply. And so I thank you again. I'm seeing all of our folks commenting and saying thank you as well. My time on the box, I just have to say, Indigenous is truly genius. And so I thank you all for what you all have done. I am going to give a shout out to my media sister and just all around constant inspiration, Miss Angel Livis, who made this conversation possible today and who is doing it as she always does, making sure that all the information that the people need is here. And so, of course, the Afro has been dropping links, etc., in the comment section, but please, please click on these links that Angel has included because it's really valuable information. I know Dr. Draper wanted me to go last because I had an Afro. So for the sake of continuing to push the Afro's archives, I'm going to share that quickly, and then I'm going to say peace out to all of y'all. And so this week's Afro fact is inspired by the February 20th, 1965 edition. Normally, y'all know I like to try to get my Afro facts to do with the topic. This has nothing to do with Indigenous or clinical trials, but it is really good tea to spill. So I'm sharing it with you all today. Even the internet did not remember this little known fact about this affair that I Googled and learned about in the Afro archives of February 1965. This was simply a picture and cut line in the Afro that said date set with a photo of Sidney Poitier and Diane Carroll. And Carroll said, according to the cut line, that the two had set a wedding date, though he was still married to someone else. Now, according to like the little bit of internet facts that are out about this, the two actors never did get married, and that when they started their affair, both were with other people, and that they apparently had this affair for 9 years. So this is very little known information, but I think it's a film worthy secret love story. And that's why I'm sharing it with you all on this week's Afro Fact. Thank you so much, Yusuf and Dr. Wilson, so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. And I really cannot emphasize enough that you all are truly heroes doing the work that's necessary for all of us. And so please keep it up and come back and see us.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us. We really appreciate it.
Take care.